going to start by first figuring out where everything is, right? So my middle point is right here, so maybe just a little bit under the top of the water there, the top line of the water, and maybe a little bit right in between where there's a dark shadow here and there's a dark shadow here. And what else can orient me? Similar to where the bank touches over here, that's the middle, and where the bank touches over here, that's the middle. Okay, so I get the middle down here. I remember over here that the bank is going to touch just below that point in the middle of that side, and it looks like the bank is just going to start right up above that middle point there on the left side, and then the water's just up above the middle point, and it looks like it's a fairly gradual line up to the water. Water, top of the water goes over to the other side of the bank, comes down, kind of falls a little bit like that. And then that point right here, woo, that point seems to be like maybe 2/3 of the way down from the top of the water. And that's like sort of the middle, right? So that's the top of the water, 2/3 of the way down. Did I say 2/3? 1/3 of the way down is that point of darkness, right? That it's coming out from the trees. So that would look like that, maybe. Something like that. And then obviously there's trees over here. Remember how we said this point in the middle was kind of in the middle of the white part of the water? So that side is where the gray starts to come down, the gray reflections of the trees. And then up above the middle here, let's see, so here's the middle. Right up above the middle is where you see that far horizon there. And it's kind of like maybe the same distance. There's the middle. It's kind of the same distance above that sort of horizon of the top of the water. Up again, except maybe a little bit further. All right, so we're going that same distance up from below the water line to above the water line, maybe just slightly higher. And then this bunch of trees, that's sort of another, again, twice that amount. So 1, 2, up to that point, 2 up to that point, and then it looks like there's about that again, that same amount of distance up to, I'm sorry if I'm not clear, that same distance up to the top of the, oops, no, not the same distance, a little bit further up to the top of the image. So a little bit further up for the trees, and goes over, comes down. There's another tree over here. And that spot, that little opening in the middle, maybe a little to the left of the middle, the line of trees is pretty much the middle, right, of the image. And so that little opening of the furthest horizon is a little bit to the left of that. And it's pretty darn skinny, so I don't want to make it any bigger than it is. So that's the middle. That's pretty skinny, that little bit of horizon. And then you get trees and trees. Actually, I should try to figure out how far over, like if I come from the middle and then I go and I half the middle, right? What's up from there? Okay, so sort of that little tree right there. So that's the middle right here, half the middle. That's that little tree. And then right beside that little tree is a bigger tree. Right on the right side of that tree is that tree and that tree. So those two big trees, and then that tree that's sort of like falling over a little bit, not falling over, but leaning over here, right? And then there's some trees at the very edge of the image. And so we've got that kind of falling diagonal line there, And then the green on top of it is going to be like maybe here to here, and then there's a bush kind of, right? And then over here, how much green do we have? So if that's the width of that little bit of horizon, right? Right here, I want to say maybe 2 of those, and then we get to the green. Or you can say, okay, this is the middle. This is the middle again from here to here. That's halfway to the side. And where is that? Okay, that's where that branch comes out here. So middle, branch comes out. So that's that green coming out here. And then there's some green coming out there. Okay. And then again, don't ever forget to get your reflections in. Don't forget to get your reflections right? You want to put your trees right under your trees. You don't want them, you don't want the reflection for this tree to be over here. So, reflection, reflection, reflection. Okay. And if you wanted to, you know, there's that point. You could kind of come back here with that point coming down here. And actually, where does it hit? It probably hits, if that's the middle of the side, it hits just below the midpoint between here and the bottom. So here's the middle. There's the midpoint. It hits right below that, right? So that's where your line there is going to go. So that's as much as I would do for a sketch. Usually start with darks. So I was working with that sort of medium gray. Now I'll sort of put down a layer of the darker gray wherever I can see some pretty dark colors. So I see some dark colors in here, right? So you put in dark. Oh, using the side of your pastel to make a big, to fill in these larger areas, these what we call masses. You're filling in your masses to start rather than any details, just big massed areas. So that's pretty dark there. Some dark up in your tree up here. Some dark over on the side, it looks like. The tree's kind of coming out of a shadow there. There might be some dark in here. And there's not a whole lot of dark on the other side. So, but often it looks good to put down a little bit of dark, because then when you put a layer of light on top of it, it just has a really nice contrasting effect. So you can do that if you want. Or you can put a light color down. And again, a lot of the marks that I'm making now, boy, they won't be there at the end because they'll be covered up by something else. So it's not a terrible thing just to sort of start with, just sort of start thinking, I guess, thinking on paper. Okay, so that's some dark. And then I don't want it to be sort of like this real thin dark. So I'm going to smudge it so that I get a more complete coverage. And you'll notice, of course, that that lightens up some of the dark. You get a lighter tone than you started with. Before it was like, you know, that sort of pastel-y dark and light, and now it's just kind of uniformly gray, right? Okay. So I think maybe put down some light here. Again, we're just trying to fill in masses. We're trying to just fill in as much of the canvas, of the paper as possible. And you'll save your details for later, but you're trying to attain coverage and just get down a layer of paint, pastel. So that would, I use some light gray there, and I'm gonna smudge, and I'm gonna What am I going to do here? Maybe put down a little bit more dark. So I'm going to go with some green on top of that, and then maybe I'll finish up with some lighter gray in there, because I am going to go over top of that with green, but I do want to get something down. Okay, and then I think it would be okay to put some gray down here where the water will be. The water's pretty gray. I mean, of course, the eventual tone will be much lighter, and I'll just go in with white over top to make it lighter. And you can see how I'm kind of messing up my original lines for the trees that I put in there, and that's okay. I mean, I have an idea of where they are, and I'll have to go back and put them in again. One thing about painting, you're kind of constantly going backward and forward. It is definitely not a one-way street with painting. You don't go onwards all the time. You kind of loop back. Now that I see that there's a lot more sort of a fair amount of, you know, all over tone from small branches up here, I might fill in a little bit with that up here. That's already filled in. And then I'm going to smush. And do I want to just go in with white there? I don't think it's a bad idea to do that. Maybe we'll put just a tiny whisper of gray down there. I mean, I barely have any left on my smudger, but I'll just put down a wee bit. Okay, so then we've got the whole image pretty much covered, which is very helpful. Make sure you kind of cover up any, you don't have to, but it might help to make sure that your whole image is covered, so you don't have to do this later. You know, you don't have these gaps of white later that you're trying to fill in. Okay, so you've got, that's your starting image, and you've got, now you know where everything is. That's really helpful. So you can kind of just go in with color now. So right off the bat, I'm going to ask myself, is this mostly sort of just lights and darks and green? Or is there any other color in there? And there is a tiny bit of warmth up here in the trees. And it's not green. It's more like sort of a, maybe like a red tinge or an orange tinge. And because I know that complementary colors are so pretty, which would be colors across each other on the across from each other on the color wheel, right? So that would be reds across from green, blues across from purple, and oranges across from blue, right? So I've got green here as my primary color, and then so instead of going in with orange back here, I might go in with an orange that trends red. And so my choice would be either like a red or a cooler sort of orange rust, and I would definitely choose the rust. But I'm not going to put much of it in because it's not a direct complement. It's not a cool enough. This isn't a cool enough red to really provide a nice complement, so I'm just going to put in, it's cooler than that other red, but not super cool. So I'm just going to put in a little bit back here. And that provides like a faint little bit of color. There's some down here too, maybe, in the water. Maybe a little bit over here. Maybe a little bit along the bank, sort of. Just a hint of color, really. So then I'll smush that in. So then you've got a little bit of color going on there. And what it will provide is a beautiful complement for the green as you get the green going down. Hopefully I didn't overdo it there with too much red. This is early spring. This is the, you know, that kind of rosiness you see right before the full green comes out. The rosiness that you see in sort of the winter woods before the full green comes out in the spring. And I might even go back over with, well, I guess maybe before I do that, maybe I'll get some darker trees in. So how dark are those trees? they're kind of close to that color I was first working with. So I might just like, you don't have to be exact at all. You can just sort of be general. So I'm getting some trees in. Getting trees, making sure that if I've got any reflections down here, that they go directly underneath that tree. That would be from that tree here, right? That reflection. Reflection, reflection. Okay. And I didn't smush them all the way because I want them to look a little bit fine, sort of like detail. Okay, so moving on. I think I'm going to take this sort of bright green. No, maybe even. This is even brighter. I'm going to start with this and see how this goes. The not so bright green. And again, you can see how well, and I'm still using the side of the pastel. I like these inexact marks that the side of the pastel gives, so kind of going over top here. This might be like a totally different green. That might be someplace to come in with, would that be right? It's sort of dark, but that might be okay, because then we'd go right back over it with that really brilliant green that I showed a minute ago. Right? So this is just an example. You know, whether or not this painting ever turns into anything good, at least you can see how the colors in pastel, you really can just layer right over top of colors that you put down, which is very different from working with paint. Paint just tends to, when you're working wet on wet with paint, it tends to mix, so you don't really have the option of these crisp, clear colors, layer upon layer, the way you do with pastel, because it ends up getting really muddy really quick. So there's some darker green back here, darker green back here, that makes me want to smudge it because it's so far away. But I don't want to smudge it so much that it's doesn't have any emphasis at all. So I put some color in here. I'm okay with this, but this seems to be brighter over here. So I'm going to add even more brightness. Not a whole lot, just a little. Some brightness in here. I missed a branch. I missed a tree. It's sort of going like this, right? How close is it to this one over here? It's sort of crossing over the middle of the image, and that's pretty. It kind of draws it together, right? That movement moving towards the middle. So I'll put that tree in. It's sort of ending on the bank. And I don't want it to be super dark against the sky. I want to quiet it down a little bit, and I can quiet it even more down with some white. Alright, let's get into the water a little bit. So maybe just fool around with the white for a minute and see how bright we can get the water. So I'm using, you can see the end of my pastel now instead of the side. Oh, I kind of messed that up because it doesn't really go that far across, does it? So make that go away. And then add some white. Oh, I did it again. Oh well, we'll just see if it comes out in the wash. Okay, and then come down. Again, I'm looking at the photograph and just being real broad with my strokes to get some white down. And then it looks like, so those trees, that's a reflection of these trees down here, right? So you want to go right up to that reflection. And then in between those trees and that tree, there's some white. And these trails over here look less white, they look more gray to me. So I'm going to carry some gray over here to show these marks, the ripples in the water. If at any point you start to feel like you've got a lot of pastel dust building up, just go ahead and don't blow, just tap, right? You can just tap out the pastel dust over top of a trash can. So how far did we just say we're going to go down here? Like just a little bit past the midpoint, right? So down here. And maybe there's some gray here, sort of swirling out into the gray. And of course that when I look back at this in the image, it looks brighter than gray, right? That doesn't quite match up, that tone, that mid-tone gray with this brighter color. Brighter tone. So I would take the white and just go over top of that a little bit to try to brighten it up a little bit. But it's not going to be as bright as this pure white in the middle. It doesn't have to be anything exact, just sort of to express that there's some movement in the water. And now I feel like that was too thick over here, so I might go in and just make it thinner, that line. You can fool around with that, but I guess the trick at this point is definitely don't get stuck in one place, so I'm not even going to let myself fool with that any further. And then there's some mid-tone grays through here, and then there's a darker tone gray where as that tree reflection is coming down here. And it looks like I'm running into some areas where there's green reflection, so I'm gonna start going in with some green reflection. I don't know if that's gonna work or not. So how to handle this area over here, sort of just a lot of movement and shadow, or reflection rather. So I'm just gonna, I guess, sort of play around a little bit, just sort of like move as I see the water move, try to move my hand that same way. And looks like it's sort of doing that a little bit. And then there's some movement. Oh, and I have to be careful of my tree shadows, right? Where are my tree shadows? So I've got one tree shadow coming down here. I've got another tree shadow coming down here. And this just doesn't look right at all, right? It looks like my tone is totally off, or yeah, it's too dark, the color's off. But I'm putting down some dark and then I'll go over it with light, right? Okay. And in between here, in this part, I don't see any tree reflection, so I'm just going to fill in with gray there. And go back over that tree reflection a little bit here. It almost might be sort of, maybe you got a little bit of brown in that reflection. I'm not sure. Maybe it's more like It's like sort of right in between this dark gray and this medium gray, so you can kind of mix a little. And there's definitely some green too. Okay, you can tell this is always are all very inexact, right? Okay, so I see some green in those tree trunks. I'm going to put some green in that tree trunk. Looks like it's sort of leaning over here. So I'll do that, make it lean over a little. I'm going to go back to these tree trunks here and put some green. You could put some green or some gray, maybe. Greenish gray in these tree trunks. And then, of course, there's that sort of darker bunch that is sort of going over, hanging out over the river. Okay. I think it might be time to put some white in the sky. So, as you can see, there's sort of a lot of tree branches in the sky, little tree branches, but then there's also some very clear spots. So I'm going to go in for those clear spots with the white. But I'm not going to, I'm going to try to look at the image and just see where those spots are on the image and see if I can get my hand to go down to those spots. See if I can just make marks right where the white is, and leave this sort of a little bit of gray, that gray that I put down, in place, and not white out over top of it, to signify that there are branches there, right? So it's gonna hopefully look as if I'm making sunlight come through the branches, or I'm making sky come through the branches a little bit. And it is, again, this is just not at all perfect in any way. I tend to think of paintings as, you know, when I'm outside, or whether I'm outside or whether I'm working with a photograph. The photograph or the image in front of me I'm not trying to replicate it, I'm just using it as a jumping off point. So this is, you know, not at all perfect. Let's see, I want some more trees. There's a bit of tree. There's some more trees. There's a couple more. Branches rather, right? And trees. And then some more sky again. Let's see. A little bit more sky here, maybe. Do I want to try to, yeah, maybe fill in a little bit where I didn't fill in there. You don't want to leave a whole lot of paper showing, I think. That's why I try to make you cover a lot at the beginning. Okay, so as I'm looking at this, like, I feel like, you know, I'm a fair way there. A good way to sort of judge, you know, if you feel like you need a moment to sort of stand back, you can turn, well, I'll tip out my pastel, my dust, and then I'll turn it upside down, and I'll see, like, how it feels upside down. And how it seems to feel is I've got sort of like, you know, a fair amount going on down here. Maybe not enough going on up here. Certainly not enough going on up here. It feels a little imbalanced. And that doesn't mean that, you know, it has to be perfectly balanced. But certainly in terms of how much you build up, I have a lot of build up here. And this is still very sketchy over here. So that would be a good place to start when I turn it back over again, is to build up a little bit with some pastel in those thinner areas. So I would probably use that sort of soft green. and fill in a little bit up here. And that darker green, and come in here. And that feels sort of just dark in general over here. So I would go back in with my gray over here, my dark gray. And maybe just soften the edges of that, what I just put on there. Just sort of go around, go over top of it a little. And some warmer green up there. It looks like there's some branches. Don't know how many branches I want to put in, maybe just a few. And if that looks too loud, remember you can always quiet it down. Just go right over top of it with like a slightly lighter color. And I wonder if that's enough. I wonder if that's enough buildup. I do see this this line of dark along the bank, right? It's sort of like very dark and shady. So maybe I would use that as an opportunity to sort of create a line for your eye to move along. Maybe use the end of the pastel and just a little bit. I don't want to get too detailed because that'll throw off everything else, right? Not everything else isn't too detailed. I don't want to throw it off. So I might be tempted to stop there. It doesn't look too terrible to me, and I think it expresses a lot of what I was trying to explain about, you know, putting down a thin layer and then building up, and you still can see that balance of the thin layer and the buildup. I'm tempted to make this look more gray like it does in the image, but I might just stop because I kind of like the way the thinness and the thickness look. So it's always so difficult to figure out when to stop. But if at some point you feel like you've built up enough and you've said enough and it kind of looks nice, you might consider stopping at that point. And I think I might stop here.